You know the name, Christopher Columbus, the brave navigator who sailed the ocean blue in 1492 and discovered America. It's the story of heroism and adventure that many of us grew up with. But today, we're going to peel back the layers of that legend to understand the very complex historical figure behind it all and the world-changing legacy he left behind. All right, let's get into it. This right here, this quote from a future U.S. president describing a sculpture for the U.S. Capitol, it just perfectly nails that heroic myth. It frames Columbus as this grand figure bringing civilization to a primitive world. For centuries, this was the story, a powerful image of discovery and triumph. But, as we're about to see, it's only one part of a much, much bigger and more complicated picture. So our goal here isn't to just repeat the old stories. It's to look past the statues, the holidays, and all the simplified tales to try and get to the historical truth. Who was this man, really? What was actually driving him? And what were the profound and often brutal consequences of his voyages? Let's start with his main goal. See, Columbus wasn't actually trying to find a new world. He was obsessed with finding a westward sea route to the super lucrative spice markets in Asia. But his entire plan, the whole thing, was built on a series of absolutely colossal miscalculations. Okay, let's just get this one out of the way right now. The idea that Columbus was this lone genius fighting against a world of flat earthers? Yeah, that's pretty much a 19th century invention. Any educated person at the time already knew the world was round. The real debate wasn't about the Earth's shape, it was all about its size. And on that point, Columbus was dangerously, dangerously wrong. I mean, the scale of his error is just staggering. He thought the trip from the Canary Islands to Japan was about 2,400 nautical miles. The actual distance? It's over 10,000. There was no way any ship from his time could have survived that journey. If the Americas hadn't been sitting right there in the middle of the ocean, he and his crew would have just disappeared. So how on earth did he get it so wrong? Well, it was like this perfect storm of mistakes. First, his math was way off. He thought the planet was about 25% smaller than it actually is. Second, he believed Asia stretched much farther east than it really does. And third, he totally bought Marco Polo's exaggerated claim about how far Japan was from China. Each mistake just piled on top of the others, making his impossible plan seem, well, possible, at least to him. So even with all these flawed calculations, the Spanish crown, who were feeling pretty good after their centuries-long campaign to retake the Iberian Peninsula, decided to roll the dice on his long-shot venture. And that decision set the stage for one of the most pivotal moments in all of human history, the first encounter between the people of the Eastern and Western hemispheres. The voyage itself was, pretty straightforward. He sailed west for about 5 weeks before land was spotted. He called the island San Salvador, and, because he was completely convinced he'd reached the outskirts of Asia, he labeled the native Taino people Indians. Before heading back to Spain, his flagship, the Santa Maria, wrecked, which forced him to leave 39 men behind in the very first European settlement in the Americas, La Navidad. His own words really tell you everything you need to know. Right from the very beginning, Columbus wasn't seeing the indigenous people as equals. He was looking at them through this lens of utility. In his journal, he immediately starts sizing them up as potential servants and how easy it would be to convert them. That mindset would shape every interaction that followed. Now let's move to the next phase of his career, because this is where things really build. When Columbus came back on his later voyages, he wasn't just an explorer anymore. Nope. He was now the viceroy and governor of the Indies, a colonial administrator whose job was to make money for Spain. And it was a role he would fail at spectacularly. This timeline just lays it all out, doesn't it? The celebrated discoverer of 1492 becomes a colonial governor just a year later, but by 1500, his rule was so bad that he was arrested by his own bosses and shipped back to Spain as a prisoner. So, what happened? Well, the short version is, Columbus was a great sailor, but an absolutely terrible governor. He had promised the Spanish crown mountains of gold, but he found very little. His attempts to get wealth by using forced labor led to a rebellion among the native Taino, and his brutal methods and just bad management also angered the Spanish colonists themselves, who started sending a flood of complaints back home. And the accusations against him were just shocking. A royal investigation, which historians rediscovered back in 2005, is filled with testimony about his cruelty. This quote here details just one incident where he and his brother used mutilation as a tool of punishment. The report painted a pretty clear picture of a tyrannical and brutal regime. The crown just couldn't ignore the reports anymore. They sent a royal official, Francisco de Bobadilla, to go and investigate. And Bobadilla was so appalled by what he found that he took the incredible step of arresting the Admiral of the Ocean Sea. Columbus, the celebrated hero, returned to Spain in utter disgrace. His time as a colonial ruler was over. But even though his career as a governor ended in total failure, the consequences of his voyages, well, they were just getting started. He had kicked off a permanent connection between two worlds that had been separate for thousands of years, and that connection would change both of them forever. Historians call this process the Columbian Exchange. It was a biological and cultural swap on a massive global scale. Horses, cattle, wheat, they all came to the Americas. Potatoes, tomatoes, corn, they went to Europe, Africa, and Asia, completely transforming diets and helping populations boom all over the world. I mean, think about it. Italian food without tomatoes? Irish food without potatoes? But this exchange also had a devastatingly dark side. 90%. Just let that number sink in. 90%. That is the estimated decline of the indigenous population of the Americas in the century after Europeans arrived. It is one of the greatest demographic catastrophes in all of human history. So what caused this collapse? Well, the number one driver was disease. Old world germs like smallpox and measles just ripped through populations that had zero natural immunity. But, and this is absolutely crucial, historians are very clear that this wasn't the whole story. The death toll was magnified by the incredible violence of the conquest and the brutal systems of forced labor and enslavement that Columbus himself started. And this gets us right to the heart of the debate today. On one side, Columbus is seen as the guy who connected the world, who kicked off the modern era of globalization. On the other side, he's seen as the man who started centuries of colonization, slavery, and what many scholars argue was, in fact, a genocide. Both of these legacies are a direct result of his actions. So ultimately, Christopher Columbus is just no longer that simple hero from the storybooks. His story forces us to confront the incredible complexities of history, how one person's ambition, their mistakes, and their cruelty can literally reshape the entire world. It leaves us with a really difficult question. How should we remember a man whose legacy is both creation and, at the same time, destruction?